This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom on how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Integrative Intuitive Medium, Kara Lovehart, and today I am here with Dr. Amy Rothenberg, and she's practiced naturopathic medicine since I was one, so 1986. So she's been doing this for a long time. She is the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians 2017 Physician of the Year, and she was the longtime medical editor for the Institute of Natural Medicine, and also spearheaded the success effort to license naturopathic doctors in Massachusetts. So that's a big deal for all of you out there who really love your integrative and naturopathic doctors. Getting them to that credibility and getting licensure is a big step for her state in Massachusetts. She was an early contributor to the Huffington Post and has written extensively on topics in natural medicine since the 1980s. And so when Dr. Rothenberg was diagnosed with cancer in 2014, she sought care at a renowned teaching hospital and also added naturopathic doctors onto her cancer team who specialize in integrative oncology. And that helped create her medical dream team. So today we are going to discuss with Dr. Amy her book, You Finished Treatment, Now What? A Field Guide to Cancer Survivors, including her own journey with cancer, as well as working with cancer patients over the years. So this is a great topic to piggyback on our episode from last week. Again, we're diving into natural approaches to cancer. So welcome to the show, Dr. Amy.
Thank you so much for having me.
What initially called you to naturopathic medicine?
Oh, I love that question. I am a person I'm in my 60s. When I was a kid, I was that kid who wanted to be a doctor. I don't know, I didn't come from a family of doctors. It was more an immigrant family, not a particularly educated family. And I always wanted to be a doctor. When I was 12, my father sadly died in his sleep from a massive heart attack. And a couple of years later, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer and died a couple of years after that. So I got a bit disillusioned with the conventional medical model. Even as a teenager, I could tell they really didn't help my family. And I went in other directions, but I was always drawn to biology. I was always drawn to things related to human health. I was myself a runner, a vegetarian. I was into meditating. Now, this is way back when, in the late 70s and early 80s. And I get drawn to things like studying physiology and studying nutrition. I took a course in college on botanical medicines in the area where I was in college in Ohio. And I just kept getting drawn back. I kept pulling myself away, mostly toward, interestingly, journalism and writing and reporting and writing creative nonfiction. And I went to Antioch College, which is a work study school. It's changed over the years, but then you would study for one semester and then you would be in a job somewhere around the country or the world for another semester back and forth. And early on in my time there, I had the opportunity to go to Portland, Oregon to work in a laboratory. I thought maybe I'll get into doing something around medical research. And I happened to fall into a shared home, roommate situation with 3 naturopathic medical students. I had never heard of naturopathic medicine. Of course, this was before the internet, and there was nothing written that I ever came across with that word. And I moved into the house with, my $75 a month rent and my box of books and everything I owned in the world. And in the first night at dinner, they started telling me what is naturopathic medicine, the philosophy of naturopathic medicine, how it worked in practice, the kind of patients they saw, the kind of things they studied. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious, this brings together my old, long, desire to do something in medicine and healing with the modern science and understanding of the human body, human physiology. And at that time, I think I was 19, I was like, oh, this is my path. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life. So I finished up my internship there, went back to school, did all my medical prerequisites to apply for naturopathic medical school, and graduated college with a bachelor's in biology in June and started medical school at the naturopathic school in Portland, Oregon in August.
And your path rose up to meet you, like the odds of you having this these roommates. That's just like outstanding.
Meant to be.
Yeah, I love that. And there's something about the guests we bring on here, all of the guests we bring onto the podcast, we're in this space where we feel that we're living and being and doing that the calling. And we all have similar stories where it lined up, you just let go and there you go. There it is. So I love to hear about that background there. So today we are going to be talking about, in general, your book and cancer in general, but I'm curious about your personal work with cancer patients before your diagnosis. Like, what were some of the common themes and the challenges and the wins before you even had your own personal journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am a generalist. And I have basically like a family practice. I treat women who are pregnant, newborns, little ones, as all through the childhood, teenage years, and all ages of adults, and then old people too, older people on the way, on the other side of the people on the way out, on the other side of the life that we are given. And I like that. I like having a mix in my practice. I've never specialized in particular with a particular diagnosis or pathology. I like the mix. So in that mix, there always were cancer patients. And I would say that for patients who were newly diagnosed or who I sent because I was suspicious of something, or I reminded them that they really need their colonoscopy or their mammogram or their pap smear and something showed up, for those people, I would work alongside their conventional oncology providers. I wasn't trying to replace anybody. I certainly was not recommending that anybody try to heal their cancer with natural medicine approaches. That's not what I was doing, but working with people to help enhance the efficacy of conventional care, to prevent side effects that often arise, to address side effects that did arise. And then afterward, when somebody completed their cancer care, pivoting toward, okay, what are the natural medicine things we can do to address the symptoms that you have because of the care, because of the cancer or the care? And after that, sort of, or simultaneously, what can we do to help shift your internal environment to be less hospitable to further cancer? So that work that I've done my whole career with patients going through a cancer time of their life, it is really what has informed and prodded me, inspired me to write this book. Because there's a lot that I just said that's also in this book, in broad strokes. Of course, some patients I've had with many different diagnoses, including cancer, have died. If that happens, and some people have just gotten old and died from other things, of course, because I've been in practice, 4 decades nearly. So, it was part of my practice. It wasn't the biggest part of my practice. I did enjoy it because I felt like one of the parts of a cancer diagnosis for a lot of people is feeling out of control, feeling like this thing is happening to you. And, there's often a lot of decision making that has to happen, a lot of processing that has to happen, not feeling well, having brain fog, being very tired, still needing to make a lot of decisions and do the self-care things as you're able. So I feel like I could be a good partner to my patients when and if they were going through something like that.
So when you had your initial diagnosis, was there suspicion for you? Did you experience, any awareness, or was it a complete surprise? And what were those initial days?
I have a very strong family history of cancer, breast and ovarian cancer. I had been tested for what's called the BRCA mutation, once in my 40s and once in my 50s, and I tested negative. So what that meant for me was that I was just going to continue to live my very healthy lifestyle, characterized by a big commitment to physical activity, eating an anti-inflammatory diet, trying to keep my stress low and my stress management skills high, creating a life of meaning and connection and community and family. And so I was living a very, very healthy lifestyle when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I found a lump in my breast a couple of months after a normal mammogram. It was New Year's Eve, the night before. My husband and I are avid ballroom dancers. We've been out until 4 a.m. I think I danced every dance that was put on, every song that was put on. Felt at the top of my game. When I found the lump in my breast, I was very disturbed because I'd never had fibrocystic breasts. I'd never had a lump before. I'd had mammograms starting on the earlier side because of my family history, that were always negative, never got a call back on a mammogram. With the biopsy, I was diagnosed with early stage cancer. And the treatment that was laid out for me that I took on was, what happened at that point was they asked me to get genetic testing. And I said, I was just tested 2 years ago. And they said, the test has gotten better. And I knew the test got better, but I mean, it's like, how often are you going to do the test? So for me, it was really just a matter of poor timing. The reason I did the test was that had I tested positive, I would have had my breasts removed and my ovaries taken out. That's sort of what we do prophylactically for people who have the BRCA mutation once they're done with bearing children, if they choose to bear children. So I was ready to do that, but I just kept getting that I didn't have this genetic mutation. Anyway, so because I did have that, the treatment was removal of both breasts. I had that done, followed by 4 rounds of chemo and 28 radiation shots to my chest wall, because there was a little bit of evidence that the cancer was trying to move out, although I had negative nodes and clean margins, thank goodness. And I got through that pretty well, leaning into my naturopathic physician colleagues who guided me and helped me and supported me. My husband, Dr. Paul Herskew, I like to call him my one-man research phenom. He was certainly at my side emotionally, but also advocated for me at every step of the way. So I was very blessed to have that kind of support. When they asked me, didn't ask me, we discussed when I should have a hysterectomy. And the reason I would have my uterus removed as well is that I had estrogen receptor positive cancer. So I was going to be on estrogen suppression, the kind I was going to be on, tamoxifen, at least early on, because I was premenopausal, has a small risk factor of causing uterine cancer. So we're going to take out the whole shebang. And they recommended, why don't you wait a year or so, totally heal from the breast cancer, and then we'll do the hysterectomy. And I was like, this year has been so crappy. Remember, I found the lump January 1st, and by then it was about July. I said, let's just wait for my blood work to return to normal, because it had been somewhat suppressed by the chemo, and then let's do the hysterectomy. So we waited 3 weeks, and at my hysterectomy, cancer was found on my ovaries, which was a bit of a blow to everybody. If that had happened some 5 years before, the treatment would have been complete hysterectomy. It was very early stage. Again, clean margins, negative nodes, clean abdominal wash. At that, in a few years prior to that, the treatment would have just been removal of the organ. But things had evolved and research had evolved, and really the recommendation was 12 more rounds of chemo, which is what I did. That kind of finished out 2014. My last chemo was and literally January 2nd, 2015. So, it was a crazy year. I did as best I could. I knew that I was strong and young-ish. I was 54, and had taken very, very good care of myself, that I could probably handle the harsh treatments, particularly with the support of natural medicine and the people around me. At my last chemo, I told my husband, all right, in 6 months, I want to do my first triathlon, because I knew I needed some goal. I needed something to do to pull people together. I needed to even kick my exercise habit up a little more. And we did it. We all did it, which was super fun. My husband, my kids, some of their partners, and my siblings and their partners. So it was a nice big group, and it really felt very victorious coming over that finish line for a sprint triathlon.
Wow, that is so symbolic and just amazing to hear that was what your final stage for celebrating everything was. Having worked with cancer before, was there anything that was notable about your experience as far as like, all right, your plan of action, your pace, your mindset, having to be aware of that, or anything that was around your diagnosis that you knew working with other patients in the past that you were like, I'm definitely going to be including this in my care?
Oh yeah, you bet. And that was everything from you can put them all in different silos if you want, and I've kind of touched them a bit already, but definitely there was a way I was going to be eating, what I was going to be eating, and when I was going to be eating, my exercise commitment, my head game. Now, the head game, obviously, there's many strands involved with the head game. Basically, your psychological posture while you're going through things. We know that everybody in the world has stress, and of very varying degrees. And it's not as much what was the stress. That's important, and we need to address maybe some stresses we could let go of, get rid of, but it's more, what is our reaction to it, and how can we control our response? And practicing, having different practices, and there are many different kinds of practices, that we do on a daily basis to build that muscle, just like we would go to the gym and do resistance training to build our biceps and our, triceps, et cetera. We can build the muscle of being mindful, being present in the moment, only being concerned about this moment, not worrying about what happened yesterday, not being anxious about what's happening tomorrow, the gift of mindfulness meditation, teaching people, and this is stuff that I taught people, continue to teach people and work on myself, a breathing exercise. We know the incredible role of taking a good, deep, cleansing breath. We stimulate our lymphatic system by doing deep breathing. There's many ways that deep breathing is so important. And then also developing some kind of gratitude practice where you can be in the moment and be appreciative of all you have and all there is and the beauty around you, even when things are falling apart here and there. Because we all live lives of contradiction, and there's a lot going on politically, in the environment, in relationships among families. There's a lot going on. We have to find the beauty, and we have to find the peace, and we have to find the things that soothe and comfort us. So the head game, very important. And then I sort of redoubled my efforts around removing toxins, anything that was toxic at all. I mean, I kept a house without using toxic chemicals, but I really did a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of my shampoo and things I use for cleaning products, just being sure we can't control everything, but we can control what we ingest and what we clean our homes with and things like that. So really worked on that. And then I had wonderful guidance. I knew a lot myself, but I leaned into colleagues because as a doctor, you really should never treat yourself. It's hard to get perspective. So that I could put together and they could help me put together a good plan in terms of some of the nutritional and botanical medicine supplements that help to enhance efficacy, prevent side effects, address side effects that arise. So I had my small handful of supplements that I would take each day. A lot of the things that go through my mind when I'm sitting with a patient newly diagnosed certainly were going through my own mind when I was diagnosed. And I reached out both to my conventional providers and to my naturopathic colleagues to really create what I would consider a dream team of people who I could get the best of both worlds. Yeah.
I love that you said earlier that, one of the things that people go through when they get their diagnosis is this complete feeling of powerlessness, and how that really can have this cascade of effect for not just the stress, but everything else that's involved when dealing with a diagnosis like that. And one of the things I really honor and love about anyone that I've met that has gone through their own cancer journey and also gone through it with flying colors. There's so much value that I've seen, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, in the facing your own death, because that's something that most of us, we know we're all going to have that day for us, but there's something that comes so much strength of not only facing that, dealing with it mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but then continuing to love yourself, take care of yourself, do the best you can, and overcome. That I've met so many just inspiring and just very empowered men and women who've gone through this journey. And I'm just like, there's definitely other things that can happen in a life that puts us in space with our own demise, our own, we're going to be gone someday.
Yeah.
And those people in general just have so much spiritual wisdom that they gain through it. So I'm just curious about the wisdom that you want to share that maybe it did come for you.
I think I would like to contextualize that question. I think getting a cancer diagnosis is a total bummer, and spending time doing all those things and spending all that money and all that travel time and sitting in a waiting room and seeing other people around you really, not doing well is tremendously stressful and very overwhelming. And it's not that every person in that is going to be having some spiritual experience. I don't want to candy coat it, and I don't want to say what I went through was easy. Did that experience help clarify things for me? I would say yes, meaning that I realized, okay, I'm not going to work while I'm going through treatment. I need to focus on my healing. I need to devote my time to some of the projects around the house that I've put off because who knows how long I'm going to be around. It was clarifying. Did I have moments of inspiration and feeling like, wow, this could be the end. I better make use of every single minute. Of course I did. I think that for many people, having a big diagnosis of any kind, cancer does not have the monopoly on that. Any big time diagnosis can be clarifying, and it can also be it can put things in perspective in terms of what's important, what we need to let go of, what we want to focus on. Some people always ask, how are you different, since you had your cancer experience and treatment for that year? And I always say, like, I don't really feel that different. I mostly just wanted to get back to the life that I loved. I was already living a very healthy lifestyle. It wasn't like a huge wake-up call. Some people, it's a wake-up call. Like, I really got to stop drinking. I really got to stop smoking. I need to get rid of hydrogenated fats in my diet. For some people, they have to make a major overhaul to get through treatment, to feel better, to, God willing, survive and do well enough. And for other people, they were already doing most of the things right. It's a matter of more fine-tuning. So I don't love the question, when I get from people, what was your cancer experience? How did you evolve? I'm like, like, I don't know. Did I evolve? I don't know if I evolved. Maybe I already was evolved. Who knows? Who knows? And maybe for some people, that's really a root thing for them. I don't relate so much to the question, I guess.
No, and everyone's so different. Like, everyone's journey is different. And I absolutely love and honor that, because some people might go through, and maybe they've gone through or are going through it currently, and they're not finding that inspiration. And I think giving them that non-candy coated perspective is very valuable. Even in general, with any diagnosis, like you said, I've definitely met some friends and family that have had struggles with feeling like, well, shouldn't I? Like comparing themselves with, well, other so-and-so over there found some sort of, strength through this. And then there becomes a cynicism and like more of a despair or feeling, and so that can lead down a space that I definitely feel would not be as healthy. So thank you so much for sharing that. Like, it doesn't have to always be this huge thing.
You're very welcome. I mean, I do think that the brightest things for me during treatment, I will say, were the people that I met, the providers that cared for me, the nurses that were, whether they were drawing my blood or mopping my brow or giving me a bucket to throw up into. I mean, what an incredible profession, men and women, nurses. I just can't say enough about them. Also, the support staff, all the people supporting those people, it's not an easy job. Everybody's running late. Everybody's in a rush. Everybody feels like their case is the most important. Everything's urgent. Obviously, we know the tremendous role of burnout within the medical profession, from the highest neurosurgeon down to the people pushing the papers around. There's a lot of burnout. Our system is broken in many, many ways. So I feel like I had a front row seat to see that brokenness. But through that, I also saw so many lights shining. I was very good. I'm very good at names and remembering people's names. I would just remember everybody's name, greet them by their name. I often brought in little healthy treats that I made, or I brought in paper whites, to force around the holidays. I just tried to make them understand how very appreciated they were. I would not have been able to have the care I had without all of those people along the way. Then, if I may, the other beautiful thing that, I mean, I don't even know how I could have explain it truly, is the outpouring of love and support that I received. And I know not everybody has that, but I've had a kind of, I've had a life that involves a lot of people. I have a lot of cousins. I'm on a lot of committees. I've volunteered for a lot of organizations. I've treated thousands of patients. I've taught thousands of students. I would come home, or my husband would come home from the mailbox down our driveway, for weeks on end with stacks of get well soon cards that we started hanging up around. I started hanging up around the window. I have a bay window in my kitchen with little tiny paper clips. And then it went across the ceiling. Then it went around the rest of the kitchen, then down the hallway, and then over into the living room. I mean, I had, over 1,000 cards by the end. And walking into my house and seeing that, it was the wind at my back. It's like, okay, I'm not done yet. Sometimes I say to people, like, this card sounds like they think I'm dying. I'm not done yet. I'm still here, and I'm going to come back better than ever. And I often said to Paul, I don't know how I'm going to repay everybody. Everybody's been so kind and so generous, and he is so sweet. He didn't miss a beat. He just said, well, do you ever think they're repaying you? Which was a very good perspective. And I take that to heart, and I hold that in my heart. The other thing that I do is I am an avid bookbinder, hand bookbinder, and card maker. That's something I've just done for decades. I love getting in my art space and creating. And I send handmade cards to a lot of people for, whether it's birthdays, anniversaries, congratulations, condolence cards. So about half the cards that I got from people, they would write somewhere on the card, "Sorry, this isn't handmade." I hope you accept my good energy and best wishes and all that. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, no, I did see. I did see some on I saw your art room and all your stamp collection.
Oh yeah.
That's amazing, because my mother has all the stamps too, and that was so fun, like playing with this, and she does the card stuff too. So that's so cool. I love that as a provider, there's so much that anyone in the helping profession gives, and we don't always receive back and understand the value that we've given others. So that's such a gift that you receive that back, and then to get that wake up call from your husband saying, "Hey, it is like maybe this is about you receiving now." So I'd love to hear that.
I think that the whole concept of cultivating and nurturing a gratitude practice and I have a gratitude practice forever and ever, and I just speak my gratitude first thing in the morning. It's often the same, I'm so thankful for my pristine health, for my beautiful man by my side, 3 healthy kids, work I love, a beautiful home, and to enjoy it all in community. And that, it's like 1 or 2 sentences, but it's sort of, it's my true north. When I start there, and that's what I am aiming at, then that is going to be a good day.
Yeah, it's the simple things, I think, that we talk about so much in general. So many guests, we talk about it, but it's a simple thing that really does make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of your gratitude for your dream team, what was it like, working with the integrative approach and the natural approach, and in your journey, but also in what you've supported your patients with? Because working with allopathic physicians, and how did you help them to advocate for themselves, and what were some of the ups and the downs of that process?
Yeah, you bet. There is, depending on where a person's having their conventional care, there could be more or less openness to natural and integrative approaches. Many cancer centers in larger cities have integrative medicine programs that people can jump into. They are not the promise of integrative natural medicine, because it's sort of the lighter stuff, Reiki, get some massage, you can get a referral to a nutritionist that might be helpful or not. It's not going as deep and as far as what we know and what the research supports we can do with natural integrative approaches during and after cancer care. In places where providers are really closed to it, it's very challenging for patients. I have a whole chapter in my book which is entitled "How to Talk So Your Oncologist Listens, and Listen So Your Oncologist Talks." That's a title borrowed from a very famous, well, at least in my house, well-worn parenting book entitled "How to Talk So Your Kids Listen, and Listen So Your Kids Talk" by 2 women, Farber and Maslish. It's a classic. They also wrote a terrific follow-up book called "Siblings Without Rivalry" that is also one of my parenting Bibles. But in that chapter, I really spell out ways that you can do the best possible job at getting the information that you need, advocating for yourself, for the ways that you learn, for the ways you would like to hear information, and how to arrive at a meeting and a visit, an appointment, and get the most out of it. So I think it's one of the best chapters. I've heard the feedback I've gotten, one of the best chapters in the book, because it really gives people a guide to how to go through this experience, particularly when they're wanting to bring in some of the natural medicine approaches.
I think that we've had a lot of questions for that in general on the podcast for, any diagnosis, and working in collaborating with natural options and mainstream. And I'd love to continue to give resources for that. So I'm happy that you have a whole chapter on that.
If you like, I don't know what capacity you have, but if you like, I'll send you just that chapter and you can have it for your people who listen to the podcast.
I love that. So everyone, we'll look for that in the show notes, because we'll pop that in so you guys can read that, because I think that's so valuable. That's one of the things, again, we're trying to bridge the gap. That's what we've been trying to do. How do we do that? That's what part of your calling sounds like is. That's what we're here for the podcast to do. And so any way we can continue to work on that is very rewarding as we see it starting to come to fruition. So speaking of the book, what advice and support, does your book have an offer for your current patients and in cancer treatment? Because there's a lot there.
I'm going to just hold up my book. I don't know if we'll be on video at all, but this is the cover of my book. And I love the cover. It's made out of something very smooth, whatever they used. I love the cover design, which for those who can't see it is basically a relief map kind of in the background and a beautiful golden compass in the middle of the bottom. And to me, that's what this book is about, just getting yourself aimed in the right direction, small incremental changes, a slow hike, if you will, to better pastures. So what is in the book? The book is written for cancer survivors, but I would say it's also very pertinent for people going through treatment and for people who are living with cancer. We have many people now living productive and good enough lives, in and out of treatment for years and years. Our treatments, if people can live long enough, discoveries and the science is advancing. The book is really in two parts. The first part of the book is really all about, well, I'll talk about the second part first. The second part of the book is really about all of the different things that people may develop or may have and may persist with due to cancer or cancer care. So those are the big ones in my mind, in my experience as a provider, are fatigue, brain fog, which is a little different. We can talk about that if you want. Problems with their digestion, lymphedema, peripheral neuropathy, lack of satisfaction with sex and intimacy, and a few others. So those are the sort of the main ones. And so I take each one and I explain and describe sort of why and how it arises and what you can do from the natural medicine toolkit to help address those symptoms. And those categories are in the ones we've already discussed related to movement and exercise, hands-on therapies, dietary approaches, through food, and then also through the use of supplementation of dietary supplements and botanical medicines, whole person medicines like homeopathy and acupuncture and Ayurvedic, just sort of what the approaches might be for each of those complaints. The rest of the book is devoted to how to intentionally shift your internal environment to be less hospitable to further cancer through some of the same kinds of modalities I just described. So that's the long and short of it. We know there's a whole chapter in the book on reaching optimal weight. We know that people who are overweight are more at risk for certain kinds of cancers. There's a whole chapter on the book about the macro environment versus the micro environment and our microbiome and the role that the microbiome plays in health and disease and as related to cancer. There's a whole chapter in the book on, as a dyed-in-the-wool naturopathic doctor, supporting our emunctory systems. Our emunctories are the ones that help us detox from the natural process of the through the natural digestive process. But it also helps us detox from things we have been exposed to in the environment that are hard on the body. So the emunctories are basically include ensuring a good bowel movement every day. And I do feel like we have a national epidemic of constipation. So that's important. Making sure my patients are well hydrated and that they're urinating well. Making sure that people are sweating sometimes, getting to a point in a workout or a walk that they are perspiring. And then breathing deeply, that's another way that we get rid of some toxins. So underscoring the deep breathing, I would add a fifth emunctory, which is not in the books, but it's in my book. It's not, if you read about emunctories, this is not included, would be looking at one's life and perhaps the big diagnosis, clarifying like we already spoke about, and what are the commitments, the people, the experiences that are just not working for you. And this is a free ticket to, I have to make some changes. I'm not going to drop off that committee or whatever it is. So that's another kind of emunctory. And then lastly, there is a chapter on, I already mentioned about caregiving. There's another chapter on the important, essential role of adequate and effective and deep healing rest and sleep. Because along with that epidemic of constipation, we also have an epidemic of insomnia. So that rounds out the vast. There are a couple other chapters. One chapter has to do with the off-label use of pharmaceuticals. So in the cancer research world, they're always looking for new drugs to address different kinds of cancers, but they're also looking at old drugs and maybe repurposing older drugs. And the reason for that is that many older drugs have a long history of safety. Whenever we're studying a new drug, we are looking first at safety, then at efficacy. And for the drugs that are no longer they're cheaper, when we get the generics, that could be more affordable, particularly in places, in countries that can't afford that. I take a drug right now that it's called a PARP inhibitor. It's $30,000 a year medication. Many people don't have good health insurance, can't afford that kind of thing. Are there off-label uses of drugs that are already in circulation? So I talk about that. As a naturopathic doctor, I'm not against drugs. I prefer to use the natural medicine approaches, but certain times drugs are very important and people need to be and stay on them. Right on the heels of saying that, I can also say that we are a pill popping, pill loving nation. And many people are taking too many drugs. The average 60-year-old in America is taking 4 or more medications. So then we run into polypharmacy, where we don't really know how one drug affects another drug. And what about drug nutrient interaction? And what about drug supplement interaction? And there are some drugs that people can get off of. Not all and not everybody. But if I have a patient who comes in with, let's say, gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD, and they're on a PPI, proton pump inhibitor, these are not great drugs. They have a long list of side effects, especially if used over the long term. Osteoporosis, cognitive decline, it's not good for immune function, et cetera, et cetera. It's not great for your digestion. So there are many natural medicine approaches people can use to help with GERD. So I might be working with somebody to improve their reflux disease, and then we're going to slowly, the key is slowly, deprescribe the medication in conjunction and conversation with the doctor who prescribed it. I'm not taking people off drugs that I didn't personally prescribe. So I think that this is an important thing to just put out there, that just because you were put on a drug once, depending on you and the drug and what it's aimed at, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be on it forever. A lot of times we get the polypharmacy because people, although it's written down in every chart and the electronic medical record, it's like now they're in for a different complaint. They don't look at necessarily the whole person and what's been going on prior to this current visit. So that's a conversation. I don't usually have that necessarily at the first visit, but into my relationship with patients, like, hey, I notice you're on a medication for your blood pressure, which is essential if your blood pressure is really high, but now that you've lost 30 pounds or whatever, I'm wondering what is your blood pressure? Do you still need to be on 3 different medications for your blood pressure? It's probably come down. Let's do some consciousness raising and some testing. So that's just a whole other thing that I think an integrative medicine doctor or a licensed naturopathic doctor could help a person with, reviewing the drugs that they're taking, looking at the list of supplements that they have put together, and really creating a whole person plan that leans into really trying to address the root cause of illnesses and trying to look at the whole person.
Yeah, I think that the whole person view is one of those things that, how do we, we bring this topic up in general a lot on our podcast, the whole person, individualized, customized approach. And more people are wanting it. More people are needing it. They're desiring it. And I'm curious, this being more popular and needed, how getting the physicians and the coaches and who are they? We need the people. There's a lot of people wanting that now. So I love that we're seeing more of that. So our listeners may have never experienced cancer themselves or in relation to someone they know. So what common challenges do patients face after they're in remission?
Well, the ones that I mentioned earlier, I think fatigue and brain fog, I think problems with their digestion or getting sick a lot, I think lymphedema, peripheral neuropathy, dissatisfaction with intimacy and sex. Those are the main things that I see in my survivor/thriver population. Sometimes people have psycho-emotional issues. Now, of course, many people had them before, and this was just something layered on, making things worse. But for some people, we know that chemotherapy, many different kinds of chemotherapy, one of the side effects is depression. It's not, it's not like it's depressing. It is depressing, but it also causes depression. So we're often looking and focusing in on anxiety, depression, irritability, being short-tempered, not having the bandwidth, not being as resilient in terms of stressors, not being able to multitask. Now, some of these are the same said things that people experience as they are becoming older, for sure. But those are the main things that cancer survivors come into my practice complaining of.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know that this handbook is really supportive for those who are also caretakers or those who are working with a family member or a friend going through the diagnosis, correct?
Yes, I have a whole chapter which is entitled Caregivers as Survivors. I had the opportunity, experience, I don't know what you want to call it exactly, but my older sister, Joan, who passed away a couple of years back, had a metastatic lesion to her brain and had a stroke. And she came to live with us for a year. And then she got quite a bit better, and we were able to get her an apartment nearby, and still really primary caretaking for another year before she died. And this is several years after I was sick myself. And I can say that you have no idea what it means to take on the care of an adult, who is not capable anymore and who's lost so much. May she rest in peace. But I learned a lot, and this chapter is really my distillation of what I learned in that process, and some recommendations and suggestions of things that people can do to help ease their own way and keep themselves healthy while they're caretaking. From the very beginning of the Caregiver as Survivors chapter, I'll just read this one little sentence here. Former First Lady of the United States, Rosalind Carter, aptly said, there are only 4 types of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will become caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And I really could not agree more. And this is not related necessarily to cancer, but it's almost half the adults in America, some enormous number, it might be more than that, are caretaking somebody in their home, whether it's a family, a friend, a child, and this is taking an enormous toll. It's unpaid work, it's work of love and family and connection. And our system is broken. We're not good at taking care of people in need in general. And I'm not an immigrant. English is my first language. I have a graduate degree, and I am well resourced. And I found those 2 years exceedingly challenging. The paperwork alone will kill you.
I can imagine the management of that, and then even the stress of all the other stuff going on is just a lot. Well, you mentioned about some of the supplemental hands-on services, like Reiki and bodywork. I'm just curious, what were the things that really were beneficial for you and that you really love?
You bet. I'm kind of personally a glutton for all that. I love it all. I'm not very critical. I like it all, so I was doing monthly massages, and I had some cranial osteopathy in there. I have to say, for me, toward the second half of my crazy cancer year, I just didn't want to do, I was so sick of going to appointments. I didn't want to go to anything, even if it was something nice like that. So, and this is a very, very individual. There are many cancer centers, support centers, either within or adjacent to hospitals nearby, that offer these kind of things for free, for people going through cancer, for survivors, for their caregivers. So those are resources that people should look for in their communities. There's nothing better than having somebody else's energy coming in, loving energy, loving and appropriate touch, healing touch, therapeutic touch. For some people, acupuncture, although it's its own medicine and healing, part of what is so sweet and effective about it is that it involves some therapeutic touch, to feel the pulses and to place the needles correctly, etc. So yeah, I'm all for that if it feels good. If it doesn't feel good, if it feels like a burden, some people are uptight, they don't like to be touched like that for whatever reason, that's not going to be a good recommendation for them. As we say, you got to read the room.
Yeah.
When you're making recommendations,
Yeah. And I love that you're sharing about the resources for caretakers too, to go into some of these treatment centers. They offer like some hands-on stuff just to really fill up their cup. That's so valuable. And like you said also about, that just you're so sick of all the appointments, and that is a lot. That I encourage those out there who maybe are in that boat to look for a mobile massage therapist or a mobile Reiki practitioner or mobile, I don't know how many acupuncturists that travel, but I know of I know chiropractors that travel and go to the homes. So I'd look for mobile hands-on services as well, and either Google it or look for it, ask for recommendations. I always say ask for recommendations, specifically when it comes to around some of the non-licensed energy medicine modalities like Reiki. We talked about that in another episode. We love Reiki, but we say, make sure you're getting good recommendations for that. But that's also, I think, a great option, because we have these people who love to travel and they can come to you.
Wonderful.
What changes do you see coming for prevention and or cancer or care in general that you're excited about, that you see is coming up?
Well, I think that the emphasis on working on our environment and trying to get a handle on global warming, trying to understand and really make clear the role of chemicals in that are carcinogenic. There's thousands and thousands of chemicals, and every year more get moved from the column over here to the carcinogenic column. So just understanding that and having government support in America and across the world around lowering our toxic load and our toxic exposure. I don't know if I'm optimistic about it, but I do see that as one path that's important, because part of our increased rise in cancer rates has to do with many of these kinds of exposures in the home, in the workplace, outdoors. I mean, right now, all the forest fires where we're living in Canada, I'm in Western Massachusetts, but the Canadian wildfires are bringing so much smoke down through, all parts of Northern America. And this is these kinds of things affect people. The other thing that I would love to see is in the laboratory ongoing, and this is happening right now, but more and more of it, work understanding the genetics that go into a cancer growth and cancer creation, so that we can do a better job at understanding which people are more susceptible, and then being proactive with those people in terms of preventive tactics, many of which I describe in the book. And then lastly, I would love to see every person who goes to a conventional oncologist, in the morning, let's say, then you go out for lunch, in the afternoon, you go to your integrative oncologist. And that just becomes part of the norm. There are a few models for that around the country, not a lot. But I think that's coming as the research to support the natural medicine approaches is burgeoning. And that's my hope, that becomes a reality, and that every person, if they want it, can access a licensed naturopathic doctor who is well-trained and licensed and following all the guidelines. And that we are not also, just in general, this is sort of more of a meta thing. We know that healthcare disparities are just shocking and very disturbing. Who gets access when and what kind of care they receive. So we need to do a better job in general at being sure everybody has access to high quality medical care for all kinds of complaints, including cancer.
And I think that listening to podcasts like this, resources that we share here, resources we'll have in the show notes, even if there's information and resources out there that you guys are all tapped into, this is an important part of this paradigm shift, because the more that we have awareness, the more we learn, we educate, then that really does trickle up. If we get involved politically, we get involved, whatever, where our purpose and calling is to kind of create this awareness of how we need to really reduce toxic load in our environment. That's why we listen. And that's why we bring on guests like Dr. Amy Rothenberg. This is why we do what we do. So just please be aware of your power. I want to always take that power back to you guys, the listeners, that by sharing this or finding resources. And I love that Dr. Amy said about reading the room, because, there are people out there that are not ready, and they might say, well, this is, woo-woo stuff, and it's not true. And there's a cognitive dissonance there sometimes. And I think that's sometimes very challenging. So in those situations, one of the things that I do is just, I trust and I pray and I say, you know what, somehow that information will come to them, because maybe they can't hear it through me, but, and that's usually what happens, like 6 years later, I found the power of essential oils. And then I'm like, I was telling you. So it's kind of trusting the process that we see it, and reminding everyone that your word and your desires of what you want and getting to the root matter, because even the healthcare system is driven by money. And if we as the consumers are driving with our dollar, no, we want that. Then we have these mainstream allopathic medicines going back and getting alternative health training and going, well, we need to learn this because this is what people want. So I just keep always reminding people of that. But do you have anything to add to that, Dr. Amy?
No, bravo. Amen.
Yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to share about you or your book?
I think the main thing I would say is that small incremental changes matter. Don't have to do a complete redo, take everything out of your refrigerator and cupboard, starve yourself, go spend 5 hours a day at the gym. Small incremental changes, enduring changes. I always prefer when a patient makes small but enduring changes that can impact both the quality of life and their health outcomes. The overnight miracles, they don't usually last, and they're usually not sustainable. So you have to take in information at your own pace, in the language that works for you, and understand try to understand where is the best leverage point. What are the kind of things that I can bring in or let go of that's going to have the most bang for the buck? And small incremental change is always going to win out. And yeah, I would just, anybody listening to this, I hope that you heard something that was of interest to you, or maybe help somebody that you know. There's a lot of great information out there. I hope you'll buy my book. It's really the book is a labor of love. It's a bit of a love letter to my profession, I would say. And there's also a fair amount of me in the book. And the reason for that is that I think I have a lot of street cred, basically because of what I went through myself and all my many, many patients that I've worked with over the decades. So anyway.
All right. So these are the two questions I ask any guest who's been on a show for the first time.
Okay.
So the first question I have is, what is your favorite product, wellness topic, or self-care indulgence at this time in your life?
Well, for me, a self-care indulgence would be, after a long day, getting in a tall, hot bathtub with Epsom salts and lavender oil and a candle, and just dissolving myself into that bath. And this is something that I do quite often, at least several times a week. It is really a wonderful way for me to unwind from the day.
That's one of my favorite too. Now I do different oils, but the Epsom salt soaks, and we have an old farmhouse, so we have an old, huge clawfoot bathtub. Anything that you just like, yes, dissolve into it. So I love it.
Beautiful.
The second question I have is, if you could detox one thing in your life or the world right now, what would that be?
Oh, it would be the real issue that we have now with people are so quick to anger and hatred. It's just, I've never seen this in my lifetime. It's just been mounting and building, and it's very bad for everybody, and it's hard to avoid and escape in the news, and it has a trickle-down effect. It's not good. So I would detox all the anger and hatred and help people learn how to communicate even when they disagree, in respectful and generous of spirit kind of ways, instead of going immediately toward anger and hatred.
I agree that and the polarization in general is just so hard. And I was just listening to Dr. Andrew Weil talk about some of the journey with him in the 60s and 70s, how it was so polarizing then. But he said now is even more polarizing and concerning than then. And I obviously didn't live through that time, but it was a really interesting perspective. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I think that was polarizing with a small p. Now we're in like the capital P. And yes. I think obviously, our advances in technology, including social media, is a double-edged sword. Social media is really the gas on the flame, so that just things can explode and get around the world in moments and have. And so I'm glad that there are people thinking creatively about AI and what do we need to do to prevent that from going down the wrong road. We've learned now that technology, as good as it can be, and I certainly have taken advantage of it in many ways, my own learning and my own sharing, can be incredibly used for incredibly bad reasons.
Yeah. And as always, we just need more love in this world, more peace, and more understanding and tolerance as well. So we encourage any of you out there to be aware of that, and as much as you can contribute as well. We all have our little part, and I think that we talked about a gratitude practice here today, and we talk about that a lot, and it's one that we can talk about, but implementing it's much more powerful. So I encourage that too. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Amy Rothenberg, for coming on the show today. And we have everything in the show notes as far as information about her book. We have some really great resources there to check out. But if you guys have any questions directly or anything, reach out to her. Reach out to her on her website and everything there, and she'd be happy to connect. And we appreciate you guys listening again. and be well until next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. We wish you wellness and health in your mind, body, and spirit. And be well until next time, my friends.